Welcome back to the CivilNet podcast. I'm your host, Patrick Elliot. I'm delighted to be joined today by a friend of the show, political commentator, Eric Hacopian. Eric, thanks for coming on.
It's a pleasure.
So we got to unpack the elephant in the room here, the big April 5th summit, which is tomorrow as of recording this. So this is the first trilateral meeting between the U.S., the European Union, and Armenia. And rumors have it that there's going to be some pretty significant stuff that will be signed. Can you tell us a little bit about what we know for sure?
Well, we don't know anything for sure, but if you look at the indications and the rhetoric that comes out of it, I think there's three areas that this summit's going to be focused on. One is defense and security. Security aid, how that is defined. I suspect we won't know the details, the extent of it. That's one. The second part of it, I think, is clearly energy independence, because so much of our energy sources are Russian-based or Russian-owned, is to sort of segue the country away from that. And the third one, I suspect, has to do with new markets, essentially opening up the EU-European market to Armenian exporters and, again, taking us away from having a Russia-focused export policy to a more of a worldwide or European-focused export policy. And this is essentially the first step towards the integration process that you need eventually to have the hopes of getting in line for EU membership. So I suspect that this is what it's about, but we'll find out tomorrow. And again, this is just speculating between the lines. We have no special insights here.
Well, the economics of it is it's going to take some cultural adaptation, right? Because the local producers and entrepreneurs, they know the Russian market, they understand the Russian market, right? We had the first cargo company, right, air cargo company, and instead of going to like the Emirates or so on, of course, their first place to go is Russia, right? So there needs to be a cultural shift in order to facilitate that diversification, don't you think?
Well, of course, but it's also a standardization issue, because the standards that Western or even Gulf markets demand in their level of products is much higher than what the Russian markets demand. So everyone, the good thing about this is, and this is not, it's a difficult thing, but it's a good thing, is you need to up your game. You need to have better product. You need to have exporting things that are world standard rather than something that's simply acceptable, which is what they get away with now. So it's a process of everyone having to do better. And on the long term, that pays off, even though in the short term, there's going to be some problems.
Yeah, of course. You can already see the Azeri reaction to this. They're already creating these fake. They released a video of some actually fairly impressive border fortifications that we've been building. These concrete bunkers built into the mountains. It's kind of funny that on our side we're worried that the government's not doing anything, and it's the Azeris who are revealing the extent of the work that's being done. And they called them offensive defensive positions, or something really oxymoronic like that. And then the EU had to shut them down and say, actually, we haven't seen any kind of. So you can see that they're laying the groundwork to kind of interrupt these talks. Can we unpack this a little bit?
Well, they're squealing like pigs, especially the top guy. Obviously, he's quite upset, because everything that's happened so far has always been the two countries and the EU, or the two countries and the United States. And this time he's entirely caught out of it. And because he's sort of chosen his team, and his teammate is in Moscow. So you can only complain so much. I think what we're going to see is more things like this. While I think there's still the mediation and things and these hopeless, idiotic talks will continue. However, this is quite a contrast in which, the Prime Minister of Armenia is going to meet the titular head of the EU and the Secretary of State of the United States, and you're that same day you're expecting the President of the Congo. So that's a contrast that he doesn't like, and it's about ego and pride, and this is a humiliation for him.
You know that meme on the internet? It's like the Nazis who are talking to each other, and they're going, "Hey, have you ever thought that maybe we're the bad guys?" And you're kind of seeing this reaction around the Azeris, right? Where they think that they've kind of restored this historical justice, when really they don't understand why there's all this outpouring of support for Armenia at this stage, where it's a fascist country, brutalizing a democratic state, flawed as it is. And they're not wrapping their heads around this, which is very interesting to see. I wanted to actually talk more a little bit about Azerbaijan. Yesterday, members of Azeri civil society have actually asked the European Union to sanction the Aliyev regime. It's a really, really interesting development, especially considering that a lot of these civil society members and heads were basically actively cheerleading the war in 2020 and the ethnic cleansing of Karabakh. What's your take on this?
Well, I have no sympathy for many of those people, frankly, because you had to be an idiot not to know that, after you get done with your external fascism always brings you to internal repression and internal fascism, which they've had for years. So it was either naive and stupid for them to expect anything different. The best thing that they could have had in 2020 was a revolution, not a victory in a war. If you look back at it 25 years from now. So yes, it's. I think what is clear is if you see the rhetoric of people from the opposition or whatever passes for the opposition or civil society, they will not get on board another war. That's very clear. But they have no power, they have no influence, and they have no relevance. But it is interesting that they're starting to see the light as far as it's this aggressions externally and the direction of the country, which is towards essentially moving towards complete Turkmenization. There's really no other. I mean, they are the Central Asian country in Europe at this point.
We're noticing also a confluence in the diplomatic language in response to this, let's say, Western pivot, but really the meeting in Brussels tomorrow between Baku's messaging and Moscow's messaging. It's very interesting. If you were to read their tweets or their statements without attaching names, you couldn't tell if it's coming out of Baku or Moscow. What do you think this is a concerted effort?
Well, I mean, it doesn't need to be necessarily coordinated, but I think what this shows is that what they wanted, that there's one thing that I'm very critical of this government, as you know, but there's one thing that they've actually done successfully, which no one thought they could do, especially the Azeris and the Russians, is that to make the pivot west, because their argument was that West doesn't need you, no one needs you, you're going to get caught between a rock and a hard place where there's aggression and the Russians will will bring a ceasefire. And then, you have this Russian mediation scenario in which you have two enemies, but masquerading as not enemies, one of them, while pushing the agenda of both of them, which is to suppress this country, suppress this potential, and turn it into another Belarus. So I think what they're frustrated by is the fact that that didn't happen, that actually there is a market for Armenia abroad, and that the Western pivot seems to be working. I mean, the one part that we know it's working is in weapons purchases. They would have never thought that markets that would have never opened to us have opened to us. We know, but now that's a factual thing. It's not even a conjecture at this point. So yes, it's obviously quite coordinated because they're on the same team, and they're frustrated that essentially what their hope was to keep us weak, keep us isolated away from the West, and having to use their mediation and this local mediation system, which was entirely unfavorable to us forever and ever and ever. That's getting away from them, and obviously that's frustrating.
Well, you're seeing an escalation in rhetoric from Moscow, and it's actually interesting to see Armenia's response to it. Just last week, the high-tech minister, Mehtar Hayrabetian, essentially went ahead and blocked what's his name, Vladimir Solovyov's talk show, right? Which is he's essentially the Russian Alex Jones, and he even had Alex Jones on his show at one point. It's the meeting of two great minds. But he's been spewing some anti-Armenian stuff, and he's sanctioned essentially by the Kremlin. So it's quite a symbolic move, and then you saw that most Armenian broadcasters essentially followed suit. And as of yesterday, internet providers are also not going to be broadcasting his show. So that's Ucom, Team Telecom, and Rostelecom will no longer be broadcasting his show in Armenia. What do you think of this escalating kind of information war between Armenia and Russia?
There's no information between Armenia and Russia. There's an information aggression by Russia against Armenia. Obviously, they're carrying out a very elaborate and very successful, in many ways, hybrid warfare. And that purpose is to cause confusion, unhappiness and confusion. So they'll take a matter that is a gray area matter and they make it a lot worse. They'll take something that doesn't exist and create it. were under intense attack by the Russian state using all of its media, internet sources, resources to reach their political objectives. And obviously they have proxies and friends here. That doesn't mean that all their friends, quote unquote, work for them or are even coordinating everything with them, but I'm sure some of them are. So yes, this country has been we've been under attack by using hybrid warfare systems by the Russian state for a long time now. So if an idiot like him gets banned, I suspect that we should see more of that.
Yeah, I mean, I'm normally a free speech absolutist, but having a bozo like that not broadcast in Armenia is not something I'm going to shed any tears over. You know what's the percentage of Armenians who get their news in Russian?
I think it's about 50%.
68%.
Yeah.
And to see that, you know, the recent IRI polls show that, you know, Armenians consider Russia as the third greatest threat to this country. It's very interesting to see, you know, because there's a lot of worry about media literacy in Armenia, and as you mentioned, right, there's this quite a successful information campaign that the Russians are waging. But it seems that by and large, people are not buying it. Like, they're reading it, they're digesting this information, but they're not reacting to it the way the Russians are expecting. What do you think? Do we have a mature society or do we have an apathetic society?
I think both, to be honest. It's a disengaged, disempowered society in some ways, but if you look at, they expected the ethnic cleansing to lead to political upheaval, it didn't. So I think it's really funny, because if you look at the polling, you'll understand that people get so many things wrong, but they get some of the very big things correctly, as far as who's trying to do what here and for what purposes. So I think that I think people understand. I think that because the Russian role, I don't think the Russians ever understood that for the Armenian population, and this is a democratic society, and a Russia that will allow ethnic cleansing in Artsakh is a completely useless country, and is nothing short of, if not an enemy, but an opponent of the country. So they vastly underestimated, because frankly, they do not understand the political nature of democratic societies, in which it's not two people you're trying to please, but the opinions of 3 million, and 1.5 million, 2 million voters matter. So they don't think in those terms, and and I think they also see Armenia in they see all of these countries in the same level, as far as this is just what you can do in Kyrgyzstan, you can do here, and this is not really the case. Both Armenia and Georgia, the societies are far more integrated into the West when it comes to culturally, political, and economic matters than many of the other countries that are in the ex-Soviet sphere.
Yeah, I mean, if a picture is worth 1,000 words, a video is worth at least 1 million, right? No. And you can't hide the videos of Russian peacekeepers allowing ethnic cleansing of Artsakh, or the FSP abandoning their positions before the attack on Jermuk an hour before. So I don't think there's much that they can do that's going to remove that memory that's been seared into Armenian collective consciousness at this point. Now, it doesn't, we're just talking about apathetic society. Some people do seem to be trying to take things into their own hands. What do you make of the spat of relatively minor but still significant terrorist attacks or attempts in the last couple of weeks in Armenia? You've had three bombs, 2 of which failed. One of them was thrown into the backyard of one of the neighbors of the intended target, the poor guy. And then there was, of course, the taking over the police station in Nork. And these are different groups as well. It's ARFers for the first 3, and then it's the Bever people from the Sasnadzerer who took over the police station. What's your opinion on this?
Well, we have quite incompetent insurrectionists. I think that's very clear. I don't think it. I mean, it's easy to speculate that they're tied to some foreign power who's trying to do this, but that could be the case. It could also be the case that they're local radicalized people. They exist everywhere in the world, and we have our fair share.
Oh, we do.
So it's hard to say, but does it have any relevance? No, but what you have to be careful. They don't have any relevance until they kill the first person.
Well, that's the issue, right?
Yeah,
are we headed towards political violence, an era of political violence?
Well, I think there's actually foreign actors who want that.
Yeah.
Because if for no other reason, the chaos and fear that it creates. But has it been? Is it something that the society will allow? No, I don't believe that. That's never really been the case. You know, we went through revolution and regime change, and nobody died. Yeah. So this notion that very marginalized figures can, by throwing a couple of bombs, as some, you know, Che Guevara's Foucault theory of like you do some act of violence and suddenly people rise up, which was always fantasy anyway. No. I mean, terrorism is an absurd tactic and politically never works. If anything else, it always has the exact opposite result.
Yeah, and this seems to me like a repeat of the tactics of 2016 when Bever took over a police station and a couple cops died as well, but. The circumstances have changed dramatically. I mean, you can like or dislike this government, but the legitimacy is not really in question at this stage. So it would be hard to imagine, you know, the police, that's also related to the IRI polls. And I have my fair share of criticisms for Armenian police, just so that's on the record. But you can see that they're one of the most trusted institutions in Armenia, despite a lot of their shortcomings.
That has to do with how untrustworthy the other institutions
are. We laugh, but it's absolutely tragic. I mean, Jesus. Let's switch gears a little bit. Let's talk about these 4 villages. What the heck is going on now that the dust seems to be settling? Is this some kind of brilliant political tactic from the government, or is this just a complete mess up that we're still unsure of? I mean, every day I'm seeing on Azaduchun, it's like villagers still waiting for answers in Voskepar. What's going on here?
Nobody knows. I mean, if you have to ever guess between the actions of the Armenian government being brilliant or simply confusing or much worse than that, you have to assume the much worse than that. I mean, this, you know, if you really want to understand this issue, you have to go to the demarcation process. What we know about the demarcation process. What we've learned in the demarcation process is when the two sides meet, the other side says the areas on the border that are internationally recognized border via the Alma-Ata agreement that you guys are in, you give back to us, and the areas of Armenia that are under our control or occupation, we won't go back. We won't give back. That is not a delimitation process. That is simply aggression by other means. So what you have here is you have the case of these villages that if you actually demark the border, the 3 villages, most likely they will actually fall to the other side.
Well, the grazing lands, right? Not the populated, from what I understand.
Yeah, they will. People also confuse the village with the villages are small, but the land is actually very large.
The municipality
is quite large.
Yeah,
so
they'll be uncomfortably close to the enemy, but not Azeri citizens.
Yeah. So they would those 3 villages, if you actually have a legitimate demarcation process, could actually very well, and these are 3 villages that were abandoned. These are the old Azeri villages that have been abandoned since '91. They would go back to the other side. The issue is not this village or that village. The issue is, do you have a legitimate demarcation process? And if you're going to give anything back outside of that demarcation process, then that's simply giving into aggression. If you're giving it back because you're getting your own lands back in other places that are occupied, then that's an acceptable solution. However, this demarcation process is a fraud. There's no such thing as a process. When you're saying that mine is mine and yours is negotiable, that's not demarcation. So I think so this just became an opportunity for them to create another point of aggression, because if you're asking for some things to be returned, which technically could be yours after demarcation, and you're not willing to consider giving up what you're occupying, that's not a demarcation process. It's simply aggression by other means.
Yeah, it's a land grab.
So if the government is brilliantly come up with a scheme, or are they completely screwing things up, or confusing everyone, who knows? Yeah. I would bet on the side of confusion.
Can it be argued that it's like a stalling tactic? To just be like, don't shoot. We'll demarcate. We'll talk about it, and it's just never gonna. We both know it's never gonna happen. They keep saying.
Yeah, no, I'm sure it is, because every day that goes on when there's no shooting and fighting is a good day for us, because that's every day where you're preparing more and you're actually getting stronger.
Yeah. Speaking of these demarcations, did you see the CSTO's response to Armenia 2 days ago?
Yes. It's a joke. I mean, just to explain to people, what they said is we will guard the country's borders if those borders are recognized by both sides.
Yeah, they're recognized by their neighbors.
Yes, which is ridiculous, because we all know, if you look at the map of the what is it that the Google knows that the Russian military doesn't? So it's what they're saying in so many words is that we're partners with your neighbors in aggression against you.
Well, Lukashenko literally said that. Aliyev is our man, right? It doesn't even need to be subtle.
So that there's listen, the CSTO at this point is as relevant as the Warsaw Pact. And technically, it doesn't even exist. Yeah. So is it important to get out of it? I'm not sure, because it's irrelevant anyway.
Yes, it hasn't been a hindrance lately.
It hasn't been. If you can buy Western weapons, you can have Western trainers, you can integrate yourself into Western military systems and learn from them. You're a member of this irrelevant organization. It might as well be a member of the Holy Roman Empire. It's not relevant.
Well, there's a second half to their statement which has been missed because of how ridiculous the first one was. But essentially, the response from the CSTO stated that within the CSTO charter, other countries have the right to bring non-allied military personnel, to deploy non-allied military personnel on their lands. However, it needs to go through an approval process from the CSTO. Okay. So they're essentially warning us, for example, not to allow the French to be deployed. I don't see any other. I can't think of any other country that this would be a preemptively geared towards. But it's interesting that they would bring that up. And again, the Russians issued a statement yesterday about how the Gyumri base is the only guarantor of security in Armenia. So whenever I notice whether that's the Russians or the Azeris making some statement about something that has not been brought up yet, call me hopeful, but it implies that something is being brought up in the background. What's your take on this?
No, I mean it's what they do not want is any third-party actors, especially if they're Western in the region. It's as simple as that. Is it made up? Is it real? We both know there's Western militaries. Hell, you see them on the street. They're in and out of this country all the time. Trainings. There's going to be significant ones in a couple of months. Yeah. It's just the CSTO charter is about as relevant as a couple that's been divorced for 10 years saying this is what you promised me. It doesn't mean anything. No.
Well, Eric, any concluding thoughts?
No, I think we've covered most of what we need to cover.
Well, let's hope that tomorrow is going to be extremely significant for us.
Yes, absolutely.
It can change the course of this country, really.
It is. I'm hoping.
Thanks for helping on, Eric.
Thank you.
Thanks again. This has been Patrick from CivilNet, and we'll speak with you guys very soon.